Time to practice your new Flexbox skills in coding challenge number 2 of this section. And once again, here I already have the code from the last challenge, which we will use as a starting point for this one. And also, as always, you can find a link to this code somewhere in this lecture. All right. So what we're going to do now is to basically replace floats and do everything with Flexbox. So what I want you to do is to use Flexbox here in this situation. Also, you can actually now use Flexbox here. So before we were using the trick of using display as inline block, but let's actually now change that to Flexbox so that you can practice a bit more. And then finally, I want you to build this entire layout here. So these three elements, putting them side by side using Flexbox once again. And in this case, I actually don't want you to specify the width or the flex spaces of, let's see what it is. So 243. So remember that? So again, right now, I don't want you to specify the width or the flex spaces of these two columns here manually. Instead, you should simply allow Flexbox to figure out the width of these two columns. Okay? So given everything that you have learned over the last couple of videos, I hope that you can have some fun solving this one. And so once you're done with that, I see you back here. Welcome back, and I hope that you completed this challenge successfully. And so here is how I would have done it. So starting here with this price and the free shipping label, as always, the first question is, what element should be the flex container? Well, let's see in our markup here. So here is the price and the shipping. And right now, I think we don't have any suitable flex container, right? Because we only want these two elements here to be flex items, but they do have a lot of siblings that are also in this same div element here, so in the same container. And so what we need to do is to wrap these two into a new container element. So div class, and let's call this one here the product price. Okay, and then after these two, we will close this. Okay, let's copy our class name here, and then let's use that right here. So first of all, let's undo the floating stuff here. And this one as well. And also this margin top that we manually set. Now we no longer need to do that. Right. And then also we had a clear somewhere. Yeah, right here. So this one we also no longer need. And now this should be quite simple. So product price, which is the element that contains these two here, should now become our flex container. So display flex, and immediately they are now side by side. Then we want to push each of them to one of the sides, right? And so for that, we can use that trick that we also used for the heading and the navigation in our website header. And so that was to use justify content and then space between. And there we go. And now finally, we need to also vertically align these two because we removed those 8 pixels that we had. And so now, again, let's do that automatically using align items set to center. Well, something looks strange here. Let's inspect that. Maybe there is some padding or margin. Yeah, indeed it is. So here the shipping does have some margin at the bottom. And so if we were to remove that, then it would look normal, right? So now you see here it makes sense. And so let's remove that from our code and put it maybe on this Flex container. So yeah, so right here, let's remove that from here. And put that right here. Okay, beautiful. So now it makes more sense. And usually we don't run into this kind of problem because usually we simply code from scratch and don't have to deal with the code that we wrote before at some point. All right, now let's use Flexbox on these, which should be even simpler. So let's see. So right here, color. So color is actually, I think, each of these 6 elements. And so the Flex container should be the parent of those. So let's see what we have here. Here we have colors. And let's actually call them product colors. So just like all the other elements. So we have product price, product description. Let's call these product colors. Let's grab that here. And so to start, let's actually remove this right here. So they are back to being block elements and therefore occupying an entire line. But now we set the parent to Flex. And so these are now Flex items and they are side by side. All right. Also, we can improve this even more because now we can remove this margin right from each of the elements and instead use the gap property. So with that, we then have the definition of how the layout looks like all in the Flex container, which makes our code a bit easier to reason about. So 10 pixels, and there we go. Great. Now all we have to do is to apply Flexbox also to this layout. So the layout of these 3 columns. So right now, each of them has a certain width that we manually defined, and it has float. Well, let's just turn this off by using Command or Control/. Then here I will remove the float, and the same in this other container, which is called product details. Let's remove all of that here. And so now it looks, of course, very weird. And we still have a float on the image. So let's remove that as well. Yes, right here. And so now we lost basically all layout that we had. But it is, of course, easy to put that back. So remember that we created in the last lecture, or actually in the last challenge, we created this container element, right? And it is this container here which contains both the image and the product info column. So this here, and also the product details. And so this makes sense to be our Flex container, right? So display Flex, and there we go. So now these elements are back to being side by side, and all we need to do now is to give these two an equal width. So again, before we did that manually by defining this value here, but now since we're using Flexbox, let's do it in a better way. And what I'm talking about is to specify Flex and set it to 1 on this one. So basically it grows as much as it can, but this only makes sense once we add the same to the other, so the product details. So let's do that. So again, Flex 1, and now since they have the same value, they should be the exact same size. And it looks like they are. Let's inspect that. And so we have the product info, 243.5, and this one also 243.5. So exactly the same, all thanks to the power of Flexbox. So without us having to go in and manually calculate these width here, which, remember, was kind of complicated and a lot of unnecessary work. All right. So this is actually already finished now, but let's make it even better. So right now we are defining these spaces here. So this one, basically in this one, using margins. And we are doing that by setting margin right on the product info and margin right on the product image. But what if at some point we wanted to change that? Then we would have to go search for these properties in all the elements and change them one by one. So that's never a good thing to do. And so we can actually remove these from here. So no more margin right. And the same here. And we can then specify this gap, so these 40 pixels, right on the flex container. So that's right here, using the gap property once again. And so this is really a lot cleaner and a lot nicer and a lot easier for us to work with. Now somehow this looks different. So let's inspect once again here. So this column looks smaller somehow. So let's inspect. And indeed it has 2 to 3, and this one is also now smaller. So let's see what happens here. And one nice trick we can use in the DevTools to figure out what's going on with Flexbox is to hover the Flexbox container. And we can even click here, and it will then give us this nice overlay with the gaps and also with our entire Flex container and Flex items. Now, what I'm seeing here is that it created an additional gap here at the end where it is not supposed to be. Now, I'm seeing that this is happening because there is this pseudo element here in the end. And so therefore Flexbox sees this as an actual element and therefore adds another gap, even though in the end, usually we don't want it. But again, right now it is as if this pseudo element here was actually the last element. And so therefore Flexbox created another gap between these two. So that actually comes again because of some older legacy code, which is this clearfix here. So remember that this clearfix introduces a pseudo element. So we don't want that. And yeah, so now that's fixed. We are back to normal. And so with that, we are finished with this challenge. And actually, we are also finished with this introductory part to Flexbox. So moving on, we will start talking about CSS Grid. But before you go there, please make sure that you really understood Flexbox, or at least these properties that I showed you in these couple of lectures. So if you're still really confused about Flexbox, you should not move on to CSS Grid, because then you will get even more confused, because they are a bit similar in a way. So this will confuse you a lot if you don't have the fundamentals of Flexbox down yet. So if that is the case, then please try to come up with some own projects and write some code on your own to keep practicing these concepts. I really can't stress enough how important it is to not just move on without fully understanding these fundamentals of Flexbox. Okay, so I hope that made sense. And then once you are actually ready for your next step, then let's move on to the CSS Grid part of this section.